Have you ever been in a relationship or a situationship where you realized somewhere along the line, the feeling of what you thought was love, connection, chemistry, well, actually it turned out to be anxiety? I know that I can hard relate to this. When I was in my late 20s and early 30s, I had a relationship with a guy and it felt so alive and so magnetic and so fiery and so passionate. And yet all along what I could see playing out was my childhood traumas, where I lived in a really chaotic environment. Maybe you can relate to this, where things weren't very stable, emotions were very heightened. I was the kid that had to walk around on eggshells because I wasn't quite sure what mood my mom or my dad would be in. They were very stressed human beings back then. And what it meant was I grew up really fast and my body anchored in safety to what I thought back then was normal, and it wasn't. Basically, safety was constantly being on guard. Safety was constantly having to think, constantly having to assess, try and manage other people's emotions, and also with that, organize how I would be based on whether mum was okay, whether dad was okay. And then if they were okay, I would be okay. So I became a performer. I became a chameleon. I became the child that was constantly trying to figure things out, and constantly then, once I'd figured out what I had to be and what I had to do, then I would do that so that I could feel a sense of safety. But all of that patterning and all of that energy, well, it didn't stop there. I took that into relationships. So fast forward 30 years later, I'm in a relationship with someone and I'm trying to constantly figure out what I did wrong. I'm constantly trying to figure out if I'm good enough. And that creates a lot of stress in the body. And then also a lot of shape shifting, a lot of trying to figure out, what should I wear? How should I talk? What should I do? Who should I be? What kind of woman should I be so that this man loves and accepts me? And all along, we're playing out our childhood patterns, his and mine, like this together, and they're in conflict. But because that chaotic conflict is so familiar to what I saw as a child, my body's like, this is normal. This is just completely normal. And I see so many women just like I did, mix up the feeling of butterflies, of like when you meet someone and it feels really, really, really good and it feels really safe and very aligned. I see so many women do the exact same thing that I did and mix up butterflies with the feeling of dread, because it's actually the same neurological pathway in the body. The best way to think about it is if you think about, you feel anxiety in your body in any moment in the relationship. And what he does is his reaction might be to pull away. And when he pulls away, rather than just be with yourself and be with the anxiety, what tends to happen is with that increase of cortisol, hypervigilance comes online. So you start thinking, what did I do wrong? What should I do? Why is he doing this? Assessing him, going into a tailspin in your mind. And then the pursuit of trying to fix that with him, not with yourself, trying to fix the anxiety by fixing whatever the situation erupted with him, you create the pursuit of trying to chase him to fix it. And that creates in the body a reward system, because you're actively pursuing something and you're trying to close the loop. But the anxiety is connected to him being the source of being able to complete it, of the anxiety dissipating if he says yes to you. So what happens then is the woman feels really, really seen. But all along, the anxiety is the very thing that is so familiar. So you connect that reward to the initial state of anxiety. So then you keep staying in the anxiety with the hope that eventually you always get back to the reward loop of being the woman who is seen. And that chase feels familiar. The chaos feels familiar, because eventually you do get to some sort of exhale and relaxation. But all along, it creates so many funky, codependent dynamics in the relationship that ultimately do not serve you. You know, I think one of the things that so many women, especially if you can relate to being the woman who has anxious attachment, you know, you're constantly thinking about him. You're constantly worrying about how you show up or what you should be doing or how he receives you or does he really like you. I know that was such a huge one for me of like, I always had in the back of my mind, even though I was in a committed relationship, that yes, it had its big problems and there was a lot of betrayal in it. So it would make sense. But ultimately, we did want to try and make it work. We just found it so challenging to try and figure out how to sort it out. I mean, if I'd have known what I know now, I would have had a completely different relationship. But alas, it also created such a beautiful catalyst of change for me. One of the things is, even though if you're in like a relationship where you're trying to be committed and you know it, but in the back of your mind, like what I did, I still had this thought and this belief system that I wasn't good enough. And that ultimately was what was playing on in the background, because when I was younger, it didn't feel safe to be me. It didn't feel safe to show up in the little girl with her expression. It didn't feel safe to show my anger, even though I grew up around a fuck ton of anger. It's a bit wild that I was then told off for being angry, yet it was the very thing that I saw in my parents, right? So all along, my natural human expression wasn't okay. So my belief that I grew up with was that I wasn't good enough. And then obviously as a little girl, you enter into school, high school, and you see all of these other girls and everyone's hormones are changing and morphing. And, you know, I start to see that women or little girls even are rewarded for how they look. So then I get a complex about how I look. I was a really skinny girl when I was in high school. I was 4 stone at age 15. It was like I was very underweight, very undernourished. Obviously, I had an eating disorder in my teens as well. And then into my 20s, I had an emotional binge eating disorder as well. So I had a lot of insecurities and a really, really deep insecurity of who I was and how I should look. So that anxious anxiety that I had about myself, that insecurity, I took into relationships. And if I look at where it stemmed from even earlier than that, it was around the dynamic with my parents. My parents were never around. They were always working. And obviously when they were around, there was a lot of arguments and there was a lot of, you know, time being spent trying to basically avoid them or also fix them. That anxiety, that attachment of needing safety, like really needing safety because I didn't feel safe to be myself. And also my parents, ultimately, they weren't safe back then. The anxiety transferred into relationships. So when I was dating, I was constantly in my head. I was constantly, my insecurities would go on fire. Like the minute I met a guy and I liked the guy, all of a sudden, all of my anxieties and all of my insecurities about who I was and how I was showing up would show up. And they would be so loud in my brain because the body is seeing that, oh, there is potential for connection here. There is potential for vulnerability here. There's potential for intimacy. There's connection here that's available or desired. And with that becomes the threat of, oh, well, this is great that you can find someone that you can connect with and relate with and actually have an attraction with. But underneath that is the threat of it being taken away. And that comes back from the childhood imprint. So for the woman who knows that you have an anxious attachment style, where you can see that these patterns play out in relationships, and even when you're not in relationship, you might still have anxiety about not having that safety and needing an attachment, needing someone, needing to find your person. And that can create a lot of unrest inside of you mentally and also physically. But one of the biggest things, if you have anxious attachment, is to find security with self. That doesn't mean stay single forever. No, it doesn't mean that. Though having a period of time where you are on your own and you are working on yourself and you are building a relationship with yourself is a really beautiful starting place. And in relationship, what it means is to not be constantly making arrangements with this person, not constantly be texting this person, not constantly be in each other's pockets, especially for anxious attachment. If you have got the avoidant, if you can see that you pull away and you move away and you take ages to respond and you take your time to share, to connect, to build any type of solid foundation with someone. Again, none of these are wrong or bad. These are just the way that our nervous system is built, and we get to be really, really curious about, are they serving us? Because our attachment styles really do fundamentally, they affect how we show up in our entire life and how we feel about ourselves and how great we feel about life ultimately. But again, not wrong or bad, but just be really mindful about how they're showing up. And if you want to move to a slightly more secure, more grounded, more present way of being, knowing that we do have our flare-ups, and there will be times where we will go into certain patterns because those patterns fundamentally were shaped when we were born. We can't fully override them, but we can make a more secure attachment in life and work and navigate around them. So if you can see that you have the pull away, the avoidance, like, I don't need a man, I'm going to take 15 years to get back into a relationship, I'm going to take my time, I'm going to go over here and concentrate on my career, because over here I have the reward system, I get to soothe my anxiety here because I get more fulfillment out of this place, I tick lots of boxes, so I'm just going to go and hang out over here. But really you know that you're avoiding dating and you just keep making excuses like, I see you, this was me, so I'm coming to you with this with a lot of experience. But if you see that you have this type of patterning, your work is to move inward. Your work is to just take one step closer to being more vulnerable with someone, being more in connection with someone, being intimate with someone, and getting really, really comfortable with being uncomfortable. For both of these, right? So let's talk a little bit about the shift. Like, how do maybe you're seeing yourself in one of these patterns, the anxious or the avoidant, and you know that you've been in those situations or relationships even, where you thought it was love and it was actually anxiety. It was actually my body saying this chaos is familiar, right? So the shift, it's really big, is always regulation before any relationship. Because if you enter into any type, and this doesn't just mean relationships, right? If you enter into any type of experience dysregulated, then you and your conscious awareness and your mind are not fully online. You're not fully conscious. If your body is dysregulated, you're constantly in some sort of activation, or you're in not even an activation, doesn't necessarily mean stress, but even if you're in more of like can't be bothered and almost like a lifeless, no energy, don't have time, you can't really think about making any plans, you don't want to socialize, that also is dysregulation, by the way. So if you're noticing that you're in any kind of dysregulation, you're not fully present online in your mind, right? You don't think in expanded awareness. You're actually living life from this part of your brain, which is the amygdala, the reptilian brain, survival brain. So you're on high alert, or you're constantly in an overwhelm freeze, or you're trying to fight something. You're constantly trying to have an argument, or you're constantly trying to figure something out in your brain, like analysis paralysis, or you're in flight and you're like, I'm going to get in the hell out of here and I'm going to avoid this completely. Yeah. Like my working analogy of like constantly being on work is a great way. It's a very encouraged way to be in your flight response and distract from other things that are really important in your life, but almost scary. So regulation before, what's that going to look like? Well, that's going to look like you dropping out of your mind and out of the to-do list and out of the overthinking and out of the constant conversations, right? The talking, and it's going to mean bringing life back into your body. So whenever I'm working with a client, there's 3 things that we basically work on in this space. It's breath, it's sound, and it's movement. So any kind of stress that is happening in the body, whether it's an activation or whether you're in a drop down state of just in a tortoise shell, you've got to create some mobilized energy. That sometimes is going to be being with discomfort. It might mean having a conversation with someone that is edgy. It might mean going and just moving your body, even if you're sat on the couch and you're like, I can't be bothered. You've just had an argument with someone, or you're feeling really down because you're still single. You got to go and move your body. You got to go and do something. You've got to go and bring some life back into your blood flow, right? And then the somatic work. So the somatic work, you obviously need to work with someone. You got to work with a practitioner around this, but ultimately somatic work is really building up more energy and more aliveness and more vitality in your body, and really changing the shaping of how you present and how you show up in the world. It's really being able to anchor back into your body and be here. Right? You're not somewhere else all the time. You're really available to the wisdom of your body, and you're really attuning to your emotions, and you're really able to really connect to what your truth is. And then with nervous system work, which is why the blend of work that I do is nervous system and somatics at the core together, because these two things, when you combine them, are literally transformational for your life. Really being able to stay in a regulation inside of you, key, because it's not about being regulated. Like nervous system work and life in general is not about being regulated and calm and happy and blissful and positive all the time. No, that's actually just a great way to keep every single woman in her fawning response, in her good girl programming, which we're not available for. Like women get to be angry, women get to be sad, women get to be in their sexual pleasure. Women get to be in their joy. Women get to be in their celebration. Women get to really anchor into their fear to redirect and navigate and move into different directions in life. Women get to really be in the full spectrum of what it means to be a human, right? Number one is never think of any of this as you have to be calm and regulated. You want to stay in regulation, which means when you're feeling activated and you're feeling stressed and you're feeling that fire, you access your anger. Now, that doesn't mean that you project your anger onto someone, but it means you're able to feel it and you're able to, in a healthy way, transmute it, which actually is really supportive in relationships, because it means that you can hold the energy of anxiety and fear and whatever's coming up, your anger in relationship. And you can feel when you're coming up to the point of, I need to walk away. And then you access your flight response, because the conversation for me right now is really, really triggering me. And I don't want to say something out of reactivity. And then you can walk away and you can have your own moment. And then, and this is what works so well in relationships, then you can come back together and have a conversation and repair when you're both regulated, when you're both in a calmer state. But it never means we don't be in those activation responses, because they're human. And the thought that even thinking about not being in them is literally trying to override your natural human way of being. You can really, really tell when you start to be in a healthy relationship, because it can be often very underwhelming and almost boring, because the chaos and the anxiety that maybe you're used to as a little girl like me is no longer present, because you don't actually hold it inside of you. Because if you hold it inside of you and your body has registered it as safe, because so far, you've been living with it for however many years, your body's like, well, we've survived this and we're alive, so we'll just keep living life from this pattern because it's what is familiar. You're living life from the amygdala and you're surviving. Your body's found a new baseline, a new equilibrium, a new homeostasis, as well as they call it, where that is just how we live. It's just literally running on autopilot. But what the somatic and the nervous system work does is it brings all of the energy to here, to your entire body. So you start living life mentally from this part of your brain, which is the executive learning brain, the prefrontal cortex. And what that does is it widens your perspective and opens up your mind, and you see things differently. You don't see things as a threat. You see things as, oh, I'm having this argument with him. I can feel my anxiety. I can see that he's clearly stressed as well. So in this right now moment, what I'm going to choose to do is I can see that this isn't working and I'm going to walk away. Doesn't mean you do it that calmly, but what it does mean is that you catch things faster and you can move to repair faster and in a way more gentle and embodied way. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. I know that so many women who are in my community can relate to experiencing so much anxiety, especially when it comes to relationships, and also that does then often bleed out into other areas of life as well. So if you enjoyed the episode, I would love a comment to hear what landed for you. Please leave me also a 5-star review, and I look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Please hit subscribe if you're not already part of this journey.